we're going to get to hear Bob Hill.
In case you're having difficulty, I assure you I am not Gene Pupke. Therefore, I would like to start with an apology. Because I am not Gene Pupke, and I only had a very short notice, I had to throw something together very quickly. So I decided to talk about my favorite subject, and that is the formation of this country and our founding fathers. With that said, let's begin. Bad history. In 1986, then President Ronald Reagan appointed William H. Rehnquist to the United States Supreme Court. To be appointed to the nation's highest court is probably the greatest honor in America. The court decides on issues that affect every man, woman, and child in this entire country. Implicit in this appointment is the mandate that this body will protect and defend our Constitution and will therefore uphold the laws of this nation as laid out by the Founding Fathers. This Justice, William H. Rehnquist, in what I consider an arrogant and defiant action, turned his back on the very principles of this country. With an air of exaggerated self-importance, he boldly proclaimed, and I quote, "The separation between church and state is based on bad history." I was appalled. It should be frankly and explicitly abandoned. This is one of the more blatant examples of 20th century American political cronyisms. He was following the wishes of the president who appointed him. The truth of the matter is this: there is some bad history. And fortunately, our founders tried to correct some of the terrible abuses when they set up this government. During the Revolutionary period, only 10 to 15% of the total population of America had any church affiliation at all. We were a unique country with 85 to 90% of our total population unchurched, and women made up 85% of the population of these churches. And the reason for that is the only way that women could have any political influence in this country was through their church. But that's not really the important matter. Even though so few people were affiliated with religion, this small but vocal minority was able to affect local legislation. I would like to quote from The Bill of Wrong by the wonderful Texas writer Miley Ivins. She died a couple of years ago of breast cancer, but this is what she had to say in the Bill of Wrongs. The country was fragmented among Baptist, Congregationalist, Quakers, Anglicans, Presbyterians, Unitarians, Universalists, some Catholics, and a scattering of Jews on the margin of society. 6 state constitutions allowed for the establishment of multiple sects. In some cases, certain denominations were supported by taxation, making the salvation of the salvation of souls on the market. They could be bought. In Massachusetts, the dominant Congregationalists schemed to siphon tax support from the Episcopalians, the Baptists, and the Quakers. In South Carolina, Baptist, Independents, Methodists, Anglicans were sanctioned as the true Christian faith. In New Hampshire, Quakers, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Baptists, and other dissenters were exempt from paying taxes to support the sanctioned Congregationalists. Anglicans in New York pointed to a colonial-era law that claimed they were grandfathered in as the exclusive established church. Close quote. In short, America was in a religious quagmire. You can imagine being supported by tax dollars if you were of a particular religion. Different regions of the country were divided by religious ideology. Religions were fighting one another over tax dollars. And there was an effort on the part of some religions to become the dominant religion, and so that they could suppress the smaller religions. One of the great characterological flaws of religion is that the dominant religion of a region can influence the laws that affect the total population of that region. They happily impose their will on any and all, regardless of individual beliefs. The global intrusiveness of religion was the reason that the founders erected the wall between church and state. The main characterological flaw of religion is, of course, the cockeyed notion that religion, regardless of the brand, is in possession of the truth. To deconstruct the wall is to deny the very principles that this country was founded on. Religion, in most respects, is contrary to democracy. This country was started with a vision, and that vision produced a country that had rich soil for independent, free-thinking minds. To chip away at that vision can only mean a regression towards the suppression of individual freedoms to think and have divergent views. James Madison warned us that a sleepy and lethargic people could lose our freedoms. Perhaps it's not that we were sleepy and lethargic, but just that we become reluctant to stand up and confront strong dogmatic fundamentalism. The struggle between theocracy and democracy goes on. Once again, this country sees a dramatic resurgence in fundamentalism. And this includes a penetration into state governments, the halls of Congress, and even the White House. But politicians in power have allowed their religious bias to influence decisions that affect us all. In the 1920s, Governor Miriam Ferguson, generally known as Ma Ferguson of Texas, opposed the teaching of foreign language in Texas schools. And the idea of bilingual education was considered outrageous. Ma Ferguson said, and I quote, "If the King's English was good enough for Jesus, it is good enough for me." Close quote. The ominous trend that has been emerging in the U.S. is a complete lack of respect for the secular nature of our Constitution. There is an old ACLU adage that carries a lot of truth, and that adage is, civil liberties battles never stay won. They have to be fought over and over again to ensure their survival. Rehnquist strayed from the original idea of our foundation by allowing his political and personal religious biases influence his thinking. He took the position that the Establishment Clause, rather than totally forbidding government involvement in religion, was intended merely to stop federal government from asserting a religious preference for one denomination over another, and to prohibit the designation of any church as a national one. In point of fact, the original intent was to prevent the government from having any influence on religion, and to prevent religion from having any influence on government. We have seen how larger churches suppress and usurp smaller denominations and dramatically influence political outcomes. Rehnquist stated that the separation between church and state was based on bad history. Contrast that with the statement of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Blackmun, who spent 24 years on the court. He said, quote, "Over our history, there are always those who want to take this wall of separation and remove a brick here, a brick there, and damage it, and even damage it more than that. I think that one has to be vigilant and ever constantly alert." We have over 200 years of precedent, and yet religious ideologues still get elected and want to insert God into the democratic process. With somewhat limited influence, we see events like 1990, the adoption of a program in Congress that allows church-based programs to participate in federally funded child care programs. It seems to make no difference to these congressional leaders that many of these organizations have a clear religious curriculum. We're talking about programs with budgets nearly $20 billion, to say nothing of their influence. I think we gasp in horror when we see young children at KKK rallies, or when we see little ones participating in Muslim fundamentalist training. But we don't seem to have a thought about our children being told that they are washed in the blood of the Lamb, or sing "Onward, Christian Soldiers." For you new people here today, I'm sorry, I hope you're not too shocked. 90% of all non-public schools are sectarian religious institutions, and yet at every congressional session, someone introduces tax vouchers for parents in private and parochial schools. The first public schools in the world were in the United States, in Boston, and the first public colleges were in America. As a result, we have achieved free public education in every corner and cubbyhole of this country. America has been the bastion of public schooling, and when federal money is spent on education, it should be to improve education in the public sector, not to improve the underpinnings of theology. It's our education that has made us a world leader. I cannot talk about education without describing the great Battle of the Bulge. This is a prime example of why we would never want religious zealots influencing the workings of the government body. In 2002, an 8th grade social studies teacher was reviewing a copy of a new textbook, and she found a most disturbing picture. The famous picture of Washington crossing the Delaware by Emanuel Lutzy. I think that's the way it's pronounced. It showed a distinct bulge in the crotch of our first president. This ever-vigilant teacher immediately consulted a number of other textbooks only to see the same suggestive picture. She quickly concluded that if presented to 8th grade students untouched, they would conclude that our first president had, for lack of any other way of putting it, male genitalia. Immediately, the State Board of Education went into full attack, requiring publishers to modify the picture. We must all assume that our first president did, in fact, have the appropriate male equipment. But the bulge in Lutzy's painting was actually a watch fob. Publishers went into action. McGraw-Hill darkened the area. Holtz substituted a rip-off painting by one of Lutzy's understudies. Only Prentice Hall left the picture exactly as it hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Now, 8th graders will be left to wonder, did he or didn't he? The movement of replacing evolution in our schools with intelligent design, or creationism in drag, is just another attempt to devalue scientific advancements in favor of superstition. Tax vouchers for private schools, parental choice of schools, prayer in schools, the 10 Commandments on public property, ministers speaking to clubs on school grounds are all attempts to pull a brick here and there. What has happened in this country is a direct result of historical and religious illiteracy and fear-mongering. Now, in this country, we have the best missiles, guns, and tanks in the world, but we rank 10th in education. We do, however, lead the world in youth ministers preaching in high schools. At last count, there were over 4,500 employed by organizations such as Youth Fellowship of Christian Athletes, Young Life, and Youth for Christ. James Madison's concern for our secular society is coming to fruition. We see a steady assault on Roe versus Wade, racism moved to the back burner, lifestyles being dictated, censorship increasing, women's rights eroding, and evangelical Christianity becoming the unofficial religion of this country. Thomas Jefferson, who at age 33 wrote the Declaration of Independence and who worked with James Madison on our Bill of Rights, said, and I quote, "I contemplate with sovereign reverence that the act of the whole of American people, which that no law should be made respecting the establishment of religion." Close quote. Jefferson expressed the majority sentiment of the people of this nation when he said the whole of the American people. James Madison, who gave us our Constitution and Bill of Rights, had a lot to say about the issue of church and state separation. Madison said, "Strongly guarded is the separation between religion and government in the Constitution of the United States." Madison did not say equal religious opportunity, nor did he say free access to government. He said separation. Madison went on to say, "What mischief may be dreaded should religion be armed with the force of law?" In our lifetime, we have seen what religions can do with armed with the force of law. From Ireland, where it was illegal to obtain a divorce, to Afghanistan, where people murdered in public venues for violating religious taboos. We must also remember that it was the coalition of the German National Socialist Party with religious institutions that allowed Hitler to consolidate and impose his murderous Nazi regime. James Madison had witnessed religious persecution and wanted to ensure that it did not occur in this country. He reminded us to be ever vigilant when he said, "Our freedoms will be lost by the gradual and silent encroachment of those in power. Zealots steadily encroach, but not necessarily in silence." Abraham Lincoln addressed the problem of constitutional destruction when he said, quote, "The people are the masters of both Congress and the court, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert it," close quote. We have recently seen the celebration of this country's 200th birthday, and it has been a battle to protect what we were given. What is it that religious proponents don't get? It seems simple to me. We have a contract that explicitly forbids the government from interfering with your right to worship or not to worship. And what is asked in return is that religion should stay out of the business of running our civil government. To me, it couldn't be more plain. Too many people, however, want to change the contract by reconstructing history. Under religious governmental authority, we almost always see nationalism, military rearmament, political aggression, racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, and a loss of individual freedoms. Our country was set up to prevent that. We proceeded to elect George Bush the First, even though while campaigning he publicly stated, and I quote, "I don't know that atheists should be considered citizens, nor should they be considered patriots," close quote. Should we take away the citizenship of anyone who does not believe in Bush's idea of God? Surely this educated man read Madison, who specifically countered this claim when he said, "The equal rights of every citizen and the free exercise of his religion according to the dictates of his conscience. The same tenure with all is in the same tenure with all other rights. Madison went on to say, in no instance has the clergy been seen as the guardian of liberty for the people. In fact, religions can take away liberties of the people by demanding that they believe in the supernatural. It's not solely that I make this claim that religious states would usurp our rights, but history would make the same claim. Madison said, I believe there are more instances of abridgment of freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachment of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpation. Madison always made the point that a just government needs no clergy. A just government needs no clergy. Wilfred McKay, a humanities professor at the University of Tennessee, said the following: the secularism whose triumph once seemed inevitable now seems a faded flower, while religion seems to be in full bloom. You and I know that secularism is the single greatest hope for curbing the religious violence seen around the world, not just for today, but for all times. Those who claim there is no wall and who promote the idea that this is a Christian nation fail to recognize that not one single person in our first 6 presidents was a Christian. Washington and Jefferson and Madison and Monroe were deists. John Adams and John Quincy Adams were Unitarians. Later in his life, Thomas Jefferson endorsed Unitarianism. The majority of the attendees at the First and Second Congress were deists, and the first congressional chaplains were Unitarians. The founders of this country were firm in their resolve not to make this a Christian nation. They therefore constructed and approved a godless constitution and meticulously erected a wall to prevent religious intrusion on the government and public life. Many of them believed in a creator, but they felt he or it, they didn't think she at that time, had little to do with daily life. And so that's why our Constitution was set up the way it was. George Bush Sr. and Jr., along with Ronald Reagan, Dan Quayle, Bill Clinton, and others, professed an acceptance that Jesus Christ was their Lord and Savior. They have every right in the world to believe that, as long as their political agendas do not include doing the work of God. Their job is to do the governmental work of every citizen in this country, to reinforce prayer in schools, to replace science textbooks with the book of Pandas and People, to teach creationism, to outlaw abortion on religious grounds, to demonize homosexuals, to usurp the rights of women, to show religious preference over our godless Constitution, is to pull multiple bricks out of the wall. Religious fervor is trying to replace reason. A minister on the Dover Area School Board in Pennsylvania was trying to gain approval for the addition of intelligent design into his country's curriculum. In his opening statement, he said, and I quote, "What are the first 5 words in the Old Testament?" After a poignant pause, he said, "In the beginning, God created," close quote. This was his case for teaching creationism. We should be reminded that anything that can be accepted without proof can also be dismissed without proof. A second Dover area Baptist preacher, using the book of Genesis to determine the age of the earth, declared that the earth was only 5,000 to 10,000 years old. He explained that fossils were put here by God to trick us and to test our faith. Sometimes when I read this stuff, I feel like we're sitting in the courtroom listening to William Jennings Bryan attack reason. In 1987, the Supreme Court ruled that the teaching of creation science was a violation of the Establishment Clause. The greater implication of that ruling is that the court still recognizes the Establishment Clause, but fundamentalists keep rolling in a Trojan horse, hoping it'll knock down the wall. There's a lot of bad history in this country, and there's a lot of mischief afoot. But there is no misunderstanding among scholars about what our founders set up. We are a nation of diversity, and we're constantly being assaulted by those that would have us all look like we were stamped out by a cookie cutter. We can be sleepy and lethargic and let them take over, but we will lose the things that have made us successful. There are many things not to like about this country, but personally I can avoid the smut, the vulgarity, the outrageousness, the stupidity, rather than have a bunch of wacko religious fanatics telling me what I can do, what I can't do, what I can believe, what I can't believe. I have a lot of hopes and dreams for humanity, but I suppose my fondest hope is for my own grandchildren, and that is that the earth will be made healthy and that the wall will be standing when they hand the reins over to their children. I thank you.